Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 454 of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Easy, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, a man that is in a fight with Google Fiber, Mason Clark.
It never stops.
And a man that will be excited to learn that I did in fact find beanies that we could make for the swag store. Ape Stein.
I am excited about that. So much so that my cough came back.
I'm so excited that I'm literally dying. Dude, Abe, I texted you this week because I listened to the podcast. I also edited the podcast. I was like, dude, I hope you're doing good. How are you doing? The listeners gotta know.
Yeah, cough update. I am still coughing a lot. My chest still hurts, but we're hanging in there. I will get to an always improving. I did a lot of resting this week. It was really nice.
Well, speaking of always improving, it is Mason's turn to go first. Always improving is the point of the show. We want to be getting better all the time. We want to be doing what we can to be trying to improve. It's a never-ending process, the always improving life. Mason, why don't you talk about your moments in always improving this week?
Yeah, so my sort of moment from the last week or so is sort of wanting to really focus on what I can control and, once again, not caring about things I can't control. So, like, in Magic, there are a lot of things that you can't control in a turn, right? Like, you can't really control your draw step most of the time. You have a bunch of random variants. You can't control the decks your opponents are playing. You can't control the top deck server, da-da-da-da. These are just things that are normal parts of Magic. And it's important to remember that you can't control variants and things are going to not go your way. And so you should work and focus on the things that you can control because those are things you can actually put time into. And there are so many things that I could be doing so much better that there's no point me even thinking about, bad variants of something happening in a game. So, for example, I played a little local event yesterday. I made a play where the only way I could get punished was if I drew my fourth Dwarven Mine off the top, and I could fetch right now for the third one. I decided to fetch for the third one because I thought it was better across the aggregate after thinking about it. I draw for turn. It's, of course, the fourth Dwarven Mine. Whatever, we continue playing the game. I end up winning the game like 15 turns later. So those sort of small little decisions do matter, but I don't care about this variance because there's so many other things that I could be improving on when it comes to sequencing, land tapping things in my turn, paying attention to how my opponent's been playing, all these other little things. And I have so many things that I am still not like at a mastery level of without having to actively put in, a bunch of active thought that I need to be focusing on those things. And there's no point spending any time on things I can't control because I can't control those things.
One, this has been my always improving moment a lot of the time of this podcast. But I would like to give a warning to listeners of the damage that can come to your mental health by not recognizing when it was out of your control. And so I think that what Mason's saying doesn't do that. But I also want to say, like, when it was, in fact, out of your control, it is kind of the premise of what Mason is saying in a lot of ways, right? Like, you don't care about it. It doesn't affect you is the point here. Not always find the other thing. It's that when it is variance, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, like, my response to people who get mad about variance is kind of grow up. It happens, and, like, you can't control those things, right? And, like, it's just important to really what I'm saying is there's so many more things that I should be worrying about that the idea of, like, the bigger field and, like, oh, I hit this deck that's so unlucky, whatever, even those little things, not even, like, because, like, in the game variance, like, never bugs me really. It's just like kind of is what it is. It can be a little frustrating in a moment, but it happens. We move on. Now I've played Magic before, but like, even things like outside the game of like, oh, these are things that are happening, like opponent deck selection, or like they have some crazy sideboard card they boarded, suboptimally and ends up working out for them in the 1 in a million chance. Like whatever, who cares? I have things I could be working on. There's no point putting any energy into that. There are things I can be doing. So that's the always improving. moment.
Yeah, and I want to say inherently, like, to what Spencer is saying, that part of that for you, Mason, right, is knowing what and identifying correctly what is and isn't in your control. And I feel like when you,
Mhm.
right, if that's something, that's a mindset that you take, if you don't take the time to make sure identifying those things correctly and you're trying to attribute things that are in your control, in both ways, right, it hurts. If you're attributing things that are in your control to being out of your control, you're missing opportunities. But if you're attributing things that are out of your control to being in your control, then you're beating yourself up for no reason. And so it's just an important balance to have, but a really important one, because when you do that correctly, right, then you're actually just making sure all of your effort is focused on where
that's just when you make gains, right? Like that those are the moments, and I really love what Mason said, because I think Mason is in the point in his Magic career, he's doing this really well, is that those are the moments where you make the biggest gains, where you no longer are focusing on things out of your control to in your control. And it's like that circle of influence type of thing that happens like in psychology a lot, that you get to attribute to Magic. So
Mhm. How
I'm
about you,
gonna,
Spencer?
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, what are your always improving moment?
Oh yeah, for me, like I missed last week. I just want to give a shout out to these guys. I already wanted to take the week off, and then I got super freaking sick. And it was these guys. I thought that I was going to have to record on a different day and, like, you know, try to make it through all kinds of stuff. And these guys just, you know, really helped me through it. I just really appreciate it. But for me, I've been working through Pioneer. I got to play quite a bit this week. For example, I played a league of the newish, like, I think the deck, we played the first place list from the challenge, which is, I think, based on a Jesse deck. And then I also just have played a ton of overall creativity, talking with Mason about the deck in the last 2 weeks. And then one of the things I was trying to do is kind of look at the decks that I wanted to play and that I thought I would enjoy for the RCQ, and the decks that I had access to, and then kind of like, as we look at seasonal Magic, you know, how should I spend my time? So the decks that I had access to, just for context, were Creativity, Blue White, Red Black, Mono Green, Hidden Strings, Mono White Humans, Flappy Is It Birds, Lotus Combo, and Spirits. And the decks that I wanted to try were Gruul, Mono Green, Creativity, and Spirits. So I've already played some Blue White, I've already played some Gruul, I've already played some Mono Green, and I've already played some Spirits. So I spent some time really focusing on Creativity to get to the level of competency that I feel like I have with the other decks that I was interested in. And I learned a lot. Like, you know, I honestly, like, think that I learned more about this style of, like, blue-reddish control than, like, I would have expected. I'm really good at combo control, but because the deck no longer plays, like, the 2-card combo, and also because the 2-card combo, like, is really a 1-card combo in Pioneer, it plays a lot differently than, like, the typical combo control decks that I would play. And it was really interesting. I think this deck helped me on multiple levels. And we'll kind of talk about that when we get into our main topic. But I've also just moved off of it. Like, not that, like, I'm not willing to play it. I'm actually going to play it in RCQ this weekend. But I'm interested in buying the kind of the Gruul style decks in different ways to have, like, another Pioneer deck that I own during this season. And because of that, kind of focusing on Gruul. But I only get to do that because of, you know, spending a week and a half really focusing and dialed in on, like, learning an archetype. And when I say that, like, I started to see plays that I only saw because I played the deck a bunch. And I think that it's really easy to think that you're going to pick up a deck and immediately see plays. But I wasn't willing to move off of it until I started winning. Like, every one of my leagues on Arena has been 4-1. I'm going to move that deck onto MTGO and go to Gruul on Arena for now, and kind of, like, siphon through my decks that way as I learn the format. So yeah, it's mine. Any thoughts on that before we move on, Dave?
I'm a little curious.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm a little curious about. You mentioned wanting to kind of move off creativity. Why are you playing it on Arena then? I'm sorry. Why are you playing it on MTGO now? If you feel like
Sorry.
that's not where you want.
Yeah, I think that was not clear. I am not moving on. I am literally playing creativity this weekend on in my RCQ. I am saying that I am moving. I have practiced enough to now bet on myself on MTG.
Gotcha.
Okay. Right, to move it off of the plate of just playing games of the deck, kind of in structure, even against like not necessarily Pioneer opponents in
Explorer, but like
in Explorer,
like getting to understand like how the deck should sideboard. What's really interesting is Explorer's really, really close, but it's not like 100% there yet, and so the meta game is different, but the decks are the same. If that makes sense. So it's like a really good way to like test out an archetype before you spend money on it, or not like bet money on it, I guess, in this way. But that's kind of how I'm approaching the season. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But that is what I meant. I am in fact playing creativity this weekend at the RCQ.
Yeah, I'm definitely really interested in how that process goes for you, as far as like once you were able to look at it in retrospective of like playing it then in paper and on MTGO, of like how different are things really, and what like your feeling of quality is from those games.
Yeah, I will say that I have one of the reasons that I'm moving, and I'll just say this because I think I can already say it. The standard metagame in events for the RCQ was really high on Arena. Like it was actually really good. I felt like I was playing against other RCQ players quite a bit. I have not felt that way in Pioneer. I am 4-1ing every league, but it feels like at least one match of every league is literally a nonsensical deck. And I do have a problem with that. So
yeah, it's definitely a bit of a challenge. My always improving moment this week was actually just around like giving myself space to rest, but also not just making it take my week out. Like I was saying at the beginning of the show, I've been pretty sick, and this cough has actually been like pretty killer. So you know, originally I was planning on going to RSQ over the weekend, playing a bunch of Magic, drafting a bunch of the new set, which has been really, really fun when I've had a chance to. But overall, like between just the exhaustion of keeping up with the rest of my life while also being under the weather, I was really just not feeling it come the time that I had set aside to play Magic. So I kind of shifted gears towards just identifying the places in my process where I'm going to like doing the kind of the brain work of, all right, this is what I'm seeing that's new as a result of the new set release. This is what I'm going to need to make sure I'm up on, you know, come the time that I'm actually back to playing tournaments, come the RC and come the RSQ season. Like, what are the decks I'm going to need to learn about? What are the new ideas I'm exploring? You know, where is it I'm spending my time? And that really made me feel like, you know, once I am able to, at that next pocket of time, and be able to really commit, feeling a lot more motivated to do it, as opposed to had I kind of trudged on with, you know, playing on days where I was not 100% at all, and really was like not feeling it. I feel like that would have taken the wind out of my sails in the way that this kind of put wind back into it. So I'm really excited to be healthy again and have time over the weekend to play some and really get back on track.
This was really similar to what was almost my always improving moment for what's worth, Abe, because I specifically didn't play an RCQ this weekend so that I could go to my son's first soccer game for his, like, you know, 7-year-old season. But like, I was like, you know what, like, I could probably do both, but I would be stressed out. And I think that one of the things that I've learned is that playing Magic in like a bad state at like the RCQ level is such a miserable experience that you're gonna get another shot, you're getting another chance. I'm really glad that you talked about that today. So,
yeah, resting is as important as practicing well. You got to rest well too.
I agree. Our next segment, we would like to give a shout out to all of our new patrons. This week we have Sarah, Mikey, and Turner, thank you so much to each of you as our newest patrons. It means the world to us every time we get those notifications. One of the cool things that all of these patrons have access to at the level that they got is the Discord, where we have daily conversations. We have, metagame discussions. We've got Mikey talking about Blue White. We've got, high level judges in there to ask judge questions too. It's a really cool place to kind of just be always improving in. And we really appreciate these newest patrons for being a part of that conversation. With that being said, if you want to support the podcast directly, Patreon is a great way to do it, but also the swag store has been updated. You go in there, you now have access to new shirts, a new swag, tons of things. We actually saw people with swag at the RCQ. It was a really cool, the RC. And I hope that we can see more people supporting the show that way. We try not to make too much out of this. This is really a way to allow people to get cool swag, but while supporting the podcast just a little bit. So that being said, let's go into our main topic. It is going to be season preparation. So if you're feeling okay, I would love you to talk about like why did this topic come up and like what are seasons in Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, so seasons are kind of we're returning to the old ways in terms of how the RC is going to be structured, and in this case, when we're referring to a season, this is going to be referring to when during a stretch of RCQs, there's going to be one constructed format and the limited format of the latest set that is going to be what the RCQs are, and that's just going to be what it is for the entire qualifying stretch until that corresponding RC. And it's really a big change from where we were before, where it was kind of whatever the store wanted to run among the major constructed formats. That was what the format was for the RCQ. So if you were playing locally, you kind of had to look at the schedule, see what events there were, see what formats there were, and then prepare accordingly. Now you get the option, and you get the opportunity to just focus on one format for the entirety of the qualifying season, for all of the RCQs of that season, and really hone in on winning at that format and understanding that format to then qualify to the next rung, which means that your time, like I know that that's something that we had all talked about when the announcement was made of why we liked the announcement so much, is that all of us were kind of even in the position of, despite having a lot of experience in Magic and playing a bunch, not really being able to allocate our time in a really focused manner towards each of the formats and kind of picking something up week to week when it was like between Modern, Pioneer, and whatever. Now, and for this season, you just get to focus on that format. In this case, Pioneer, and just have your deck and go for it. So, does that cover it for you?
Yeah, no, it really does. And like, honestly, it helps this podcast a lot, right? Like, we get to focus on Pioneer right now as it is Pioneer season. It really helps constructive criticism give you all the best content possible. And I think the way that we think about how this will work, I think, Abe, you covered a lot of this, but like, stores will be able to offer you sealed or constructed. They'll be able to offer the most recent standard format or Lord of the Rings, which will be interesting. So this one will be a little bit different, but they will only be able to offer Pioneer as a constructed format. And then, as far as we've been told, this hasn't changed yet, the tournament you're qualifying for will also be the format of the constructed format that you're playing, which is really cool. It's really awesome. One of the things that we want to talk about going into this is how to manage time. And Mason, I want you to kind of talk about a tweet that I really liked for this podcast in talking about time management. If you want to take a second, and I'll put it.
Sure.
I'll put it in the show notes for what it's worth.
Yeah, so I just made a tweet last week with a poll. It was basically like a hypothetical scenario of, it's 1 week before your RC that you're qualified for. All signs point to some deck being the best deck, but you and basically the community perceive the deck as being very challenging to play. You haven't played the deck much before now. What would you do? Would you register the deck that is the perceived hard deck but the best deck, or would you try to metagame against it? and it is something that I sort of was sparked by the past RC, but it's applicable to a lot of different areas in Magic, and it's like a pretty interesting sort of thought idea. Like, what would you do in these sort of spots?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what part of my always improving moment in learning creativity was I think that deck was really hard to learn, especially like if you are familiar with creativity decks in other formats. I played creativity in is it Historic had the creativity deck? Well, there was a format that had a creativity deck with I've also played it in Modern, and this version's very different. It's very hard. There's lots of different choices, and so this tweet really registered with me. And it's funny because if you look at the screenshot in the show notes, I said I would register the deck. Like, for example, I registered Mono White because I thought it was the best deck at this last RC. However, I think that there were a lot of people that thought, whether it be Rakdos or Esper Legends were the best deck. And one of the things that we'll talk about during this, and how this applies, we'll get into this now, is that I think a week is a lot longer than people realize if your time is spent trying to learn a deck. I just said I'd spent a week and a half on Creativity, Abe, and I have less time than a lot of people. Like, I have a full-time job, I have 2 kids, I have podcasts. Like, I think people underestimate how much time a week is to learn a deck in a proficient manner if that is your sole goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also depends on how you define learning a deck and what your goals are, right? Like, I could see, if I had to pick up Lotus Field for an RCQ at the end of the week this week, I would have to be really, really smart with my time to be able to do that, right? Like, if you're playing something with a lot of intricate, specific, moving pieces, that's a lot. But if you're talking about something that might be a little more, not to say generic, but just something that has a little bit more of a fair and repeatable game plan across a lot of games of Magic, right? If I wanted to play Gruul or I wanted to play, Red Black, I would have to know a lot about the nuance of what I'm going to be encountering. But I wouldn't necessarily need to have a lot of time or a lot of specific knowledge to be learning.
Yeah, I want to challenge you though, because I think those are different sides of the same coin, right? On the, like you say, you use Gruul and Red Black, and I just think those are really good examples of where you need to know what your opponent is doing a lot, and you need to know the metagame a lot to pick your deck list. Whereas a deck like Lotus Field, you need to know your game plan a lot and what your opponent's going to do to disrupt you. But it doesn't change a lot depending on the metagame as far as your deck building, right?
Right, but that's the thing is, I think that when you talk about learning a deck, right, I think that most people think about, knowing what to do on your turns with your cards and your mana, right? Knowing how to use your resources. And like, I mean, I've got friends who have 1 GPs, and we were hanging out, and they were like playing a match of Lotus Field and talking through it, and I was like trying to help them figure out how to play it because neither of us really had experience doing it. They're like, yeah, I like 3-2'd this league because I think in probably 5 of my games I just had no idea what was going on. Right, and so getting that level of comfort, not every deck is like that, right? If the same player were to pick up Red, Black, or Gruul, it's a lot easier to identify that and to spend time, and it all comes down to how you spend the time, right? If you're learning something like Lotus Field, it can be, I need to spend the time understanding how I'm using my cards. Whereas if I'm playing something like Red, Black, or Gruul, I need to understand what exchanges are important and what my goals are on turns.
It's so funny because as you're talking, sorry, I wasn't trying to interrupt you. You were finishing a thought, and then
that was the end of my point.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. As you were talking, I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're now defining like why Abe and I constantly say how easy Control is to learn and pick up compared to other decks, where it becomes, that's a flowchart deck, right? And I'm kind of curious, Mason, where you sit on, like, obviously you had your own intention with this tweet, but how do you think this tweet might apply to somebody that's like, let's say they have as many options as Spencer had, or let's say they had half the options that Spencer had. How does this tweet apply to like learning a deck for your RCQ?
Well, I think the main thing that this sort of jumped out to me, and it also, like, we talked a little bit before the show. I forgot to mention the other part of it, and I will just mention it here because she's a friend. I think she can handle it. So, but another thing that sort of sparked this was my friend Ash Shutter on Twitter, and she like acknowledged and made a tweet that was like, "Hey, I think Esper's really good, maybe the best deck, but I can't learn it in a week and a half or whatever for the RCQ. I'm sorry, for the RC proper." And instead, she like switched decks a whole bunch and up in a weird spot. I think that if you're going to an event like this, and I specifically also made it the RC, where it's kind of an event that you're traveling to, it's a destination event. If it's like a big thing to you, and that goal might change for other people for what it's worth, right? Like your local RCQ that's like, 10 minutes from your house might be the only one you can play all season. That might be an equivalent style event for you, and that's totally valid. The metrics change for everyone. I was just trying to paint with a broad brush. But, if you had something like that, I think you should go after whatever you think is the best and not avoid the challenge. She sort of did, and I think got punished accordingly, not putting in enough time in that sort of spot there. And that's just a moment for her to learn and improve from and go on. We've all had those moments. So I sort of think, if you have an event coming up and you have a lot of decks to choose from, the good thing about it being Pioneer season is that there is time to play other decks and learn things, but you should go with whatever deck is, the best deck for you to succeed with. And you should go accordingly. And the idea specifically of the tweet is that you can metagame against it implies that you actually can learn the deck, right? If you think you can metagame against the deck, typically involves knowing the deck pretty well. Maybe, some things like Esper Legends, for example, has a lot of looting. So, from a strategic level, you can understand Esper Legends and metagame against it, but maybe not play it very well, but that's not going to be the case for every deck. And, I think the example that sparked this tweet sort of breaks its rule. But that'd be sort of my thoughts on it, regardless of the number of decks you have.
Well, it's so funny because I think that what you just said applies both to our next point and then something that Abe and I just discussed, in that, using your time for your needs and like applying that. Abe mentioned Gruul and Red Black, and the funny thing is like I mentioned, well, those are the reverse side of the same coin as a combo deck, right? Like the combo deck needs to know this part, you know this part, but both are technically trying to learn some portion of both sides of the coin in order to get to the end result that they want. And I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting the way that you put that. If you wanted to say something there for a second, I wanted to give you that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes down to it, right, like in reference to Mason's tweet of, you have a week, right? When it comes to having the season to work with, you kind of always and never have that week, if that makes sense, where you always have the opportunity to really say, okay, I need to take an entirely different approach. I need to learn something new, and focus your time on that. But you also know that week's coming the next week too. So the time view can be also really long and really short. And when you're thinking about that in terms of how you're preparing for a season, it really comes down to how is it that you are aligning the usage of your time with your goals in terms of whatever decks you're learning, right? Like you might get a lot out of, for Pioneer as the example, because that's the season we're in, you might get a lot out of understanding playing Lotus Field in order to understand disrupting Lotus Field, right? If that's something you're having trouble with in terms of all the other decks you might actually be more interested in playing, spending a little time understanding things from Lotus Field side might be the best use of your time that week to improve your performance at the event with whatever deck you play. Vice versa, you might get more out of playing, playing a lot of Gruul as a red-black player to kind of understand presenting threats to the format more as opposed to presenting answers to things. And it all really comes down to allocating your time in a way that makes it so that you are showing up with the deck that you should be showing up with, as opposed to kind of misusing that time or putting it in places that don't lead to your being productive in the way that, like Mason was saying, if you understand it well enough to metagame against it, maybe you should have just played it because you have to have that understanding, and you kind of get more opportunity to leverage that understanding because you're in a season and not just in 1 week.
Yeah, it's almost like each week is a challenge to be always improving, and I really like the way you said that there, Abe. I want to quickly touch before we move off of this on how limited equates on to this time management. and I'll just say my thoughts on it, and then if you guys want to give yours, it's totally fine. One of the things that I really like about seasonal Magic is that it actually lets me play more limited as a person that has a constructed podcast, because I can go look at my RCQ schedule, and I can see like, okay, here are my limited events. So I need to play some limited by this time. Or I could skip the first one, and then all of my downtime, like time where I'm like, I'm banging my head against a wall in Pioneer with this deck, I need a break, but I still want to flex my magic muscles, can then be dedicated to limited. And that already will give me a leg up against a lot of players. They won't give you a leg up against the limited players. And I want to be clear that, like, you're not going to go beat the limited grinder that's played 500 drafts of every limited set by doing this. But what you will do is you'll flex your magic muscles. You'll still get to do this and, like, kind of have a fun format in Magic that isn't like, well, I'm going to go play Standard now, or I'm going to go play like this other constructed format now that gives me no benefit. You still get to just go have fun doing a thing that flexes different magic muscles and, you know, is going to help you as long as it's a part of your schedule. And also, I just think that it's a more healthy way to consume Magic. So that's my thought. Abe, you were nodding your head a bunch. I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I love limited. I'm a limited guy. I think you can either embrace it and be like, I want to engage with limited if you're really just being serious about qualifying, or you can kind of say that it's not something you're really going to care about, and maybe you'll take your shot if, like, the event lines up for you. But I find that overall, just having another place to be able to put your attention, at least for me, it always helps be able to put down the problems I'm working with, to, like, have another thing to work on. So I don't know. I mean, you can get a lot of good information and be a very, very, I want to push back a little bit against what you just said about not being able to beat the limited guy who plays like 500 matches or whatever, and you're not that person. You can learn a lot about the format. There's a lot of really good resources out there to really understand a limited format, and often in better understanding, you know, some aspects of some limited formats, you might even gain insights that help you in other constructed formats or other applications. Like, I know that I've learned a lot that I've applied to other games or like other formats from just listening to drafting archetypes for the same reason. So
love the network plug. Mason, you actually you were a lot like me in the way that we both started Magic, where we were like constructed guys first. I'm kind of curious, like, as seasonal MTG approaches, I don't know if Tennessee has limited, like Utah's going to have limited, but I'm kind of curious your thoughts here.
I can tell you I'm driving 2 hours to not play a 40-minute away limited RCQ this Saturday.
Okay, so they will have the limited.
Well, we have exactly one. It's this next Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically everyone's not going to it. So I'm curious to see if there'll be more. I'm sure there will be some people that go to it, but everyone that I know is kind of avoiding. But yeah, that also, to be fair, there's also a charity modern RCQ that's going on. That's a destination event. So, like, you know, some of it's about that, some of it's about limited. But yeah, for me, like, when you talk about like gathering information about this, I personally like get to Slack a bunch more, which is great. Like, I don't have to be as caught up on everything because I've put in time for Pioneer, and older formats move slower. You know, now we're at the beginning of a new set, and we have another new set coming out soon, so that's going to change things up. And I have the RC coming, but for me, it's like I don't have to be as on top of everything right now all the time if I don't want to be, because, you know, I'm going to be, everyone's moving in the same direction. I can follow the other content that people are creating. I can absorb that way, and I don't need to be on like the cutting edge in like the same exact way up until the RC. So like right now and until Aftermath comes out, you know, I'm kind of taking a more casual approach to Pioneer and like really exploring the more fringe stuff in the format, you know, like doing a lot of Rona combo and like a lot of.
Don't do that.
I need more than fringe. No, Rona's great. I'm glad I happily bought my cards.
Did you really?
Yeah, you know,
we should start after the podcast. We played a league of that, and I would be interested to know your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. No, deck's good. It's not broken or anything, but it's like totally fine. It's just not the best deck to playing, I think. But yeah, like, you know, I've been and I know that I think we talked about this not on the show, but in private, where it's like I've never had seasonal play. I've always lived in the chaos of like, all right, this week it's modern, next week it's pioneer, then it's standard, back to modern, pioneer, standard, modern, modern, pioneer. And I'm interested to sort of see how it goes because, it's going to be interesting where it's like, especially from a content point of like, oh, everything is pioneer from now until, end of the summer. How does that change things, So
It's so much better, Mason, as somebody that's lived in both. It's
Yeah.
smooth sailing.
boring.
It's not boring. Don't do that.
Well, I'm just being honest.
I think that one of the things that you can be honest. Like, you've lived in the chaos. You probably enjoy the chaos more than I do too.
Yeah, I love that it's always different.
Yeah,
it's great.
I think that one of the things for me is like I get to get really granular. Like I get to go. I often have to approach formats from like a macro perspective, and I get to go really micro when we get to this level. One of the pieces of feedback was about my thoughts on Pioneer like months ago, and I had to approach Pioneer from a macro perspective, and I gave some comments that were micro, and I think that for me as a content creator, like this really excites me, and I think that actually goes into our next segment on how to gather info. And I think that resources will be really valuable now. And I think that before, I'll just go first on this one. Resources were really hard to know who to trust before. Because everybody had their own approach and everybody had their own agenda when you didn't have seasonal MTG, right? Like they had their own things that they were working on because they enjoyed it, or because they had family obligations, or because they were qualified for a certain tournament, or their own RCQ was this, or their own RCQ was that. And so different types of content became... I'll just use Mason as an example. Mason almost always focused on modern. And that doesn't mean that his standard thoughts or his pioneer thoughts were bad, but like, if I was going to go to somebody about modern, I would go to Mason. And if I was going to go to somebody about Pioneer, maybe I would go to somebody like, our friend and our colleague, Misplaced Ginger. Maybe that would be where I would go. And I think that like understanding the resources you have available now will become easier. I don't know. I also think that like gathering deck lists becomes a lot easier because everyone's focused on the same thing. I don't know, Abe. I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to gathering info and getting good info over the course of seasons, it's something we're going to see kind of shake out, I think, when it comes to content. But when everyone is playing the same format all the time, and it's a format that everyone's focused on, it is a lot harder to kind of sweep things under the rug when you are consistently wrong. And I think that, like, much to Misplaced Ginger's credit, he plays the best and most consistent deck in the format for playing events like RCQs, and he is incredibly consistent with what he is telling you to do and what will work and what he finds that works. And that's why he's such a great source of information and a great content creator for the format, right? Is because it's a format that moves some, but moves slowly, and he knows all the things to do, and he figures it out, and you can trust his information. But you're going to need to find other Misplaced Gingers out there for people who aren't necessarily going to be people who want to play red-black, or it's not great for their metagame because, of whatever is being played around you. And kind of leaning into that idea of finding the people who are just doing things that make sense again, and especially in terms of content, like finding people who are, giving you consistently good information is going to be a really, really valuable thing to be doing again. I feel like it's kind of the first time we're seeing that since, content in Magic kind of fell apart over the pandemic. So, just keep in mind who it is that you're trusting with your decisions, right? Who it is you're trusting to source you on info. But there's a lot of great info out there, right? You can look at, Magic Online players who do really well in the challenges every week, right? And see how they're thinking about it and think like the decks they're playing, right? Even for people who play multiple different decks or someone who specializes in one, right? You can see kind of what their thought process is in terms of how they're tuning for what they're seeing. And there's just there's a lot to gain from it being seasonal, because you will get the opportunity to build that kind of, very parasocial relationship with the way that they're playing Magic and building their deck. So,
Mason?
I don't think I have anything of real value to add, to be honest. I think y'all kind of hit the nail on the head. I concur with what you said.
Yeah, I think that as far as like resources, you're gonna figure it out. I think you're gonna build trusted sources. I would encourage you, if you feel like there's a trusted source, that like share it in our Discord. Like let the community know that like, hey, this person is adding value to me in Magic the Gathering, and like I am not the type of person that like wants to shut down other content creators from being shared in my Discord, and I just want to be clear that like, if there's somebody that's like really adding value to you, I too am a Magic player. I too want to be always improving, and I would encourage people to share that. I would also say that data evaluation is something we didn't really touch on yet, that I want to touch on really quickly. In that, this is going to become really interesting, because in the old days of PTQs, I remember there was like a week or two where Boggles won like 3 modern PTQs in a row in like Canada and America. And people were like, Boggles is broken. Oh my gosh, Boggles is the best deck ever. And I remember just being like, that's not true. I don't even know that it has good matchups against what it's going to have good matchups against. And data evaluation is going to be not just about what the data says, but to challenge the data in your testing and to come to your own conclusions based upon how you're building your decks and what configuration you come up with to fix the problem that's being presented to you. And I think using the data will be more important than anything when you get to this level of granularity across players.
yeah, and I would just caution against calling. I mean, for me, I always think of it as like those things, they're data points, but they're just results, right? Like when you see what won the RCQ that you like attended but missed top 8 of or whatever, when all the decks that were in the top 8 for the last 3 RCQs that happened in your area, those are all just data points, and like there's more going on than what you're going to see just on the final results. But I always am someone who stresses that understanding the macro of what's going on, right, that's where it really gets important in evaluating what you're seeing when it comes to the data you're seeing. And because everyone's going to be seeing all those same, right, everyone around you who's really engaging themselves, they'll see the same results and they'll see kind of the same metagames of rooms happen. Kind of understanding what it is that you should be responding to and how to respond to the information you're taking in is going to be a big part of it when it comes to seasons. But I wouldn't really call it like, I don't know. I would caution against feeling like what you should do is every week look at what won or look at what the room was and be like, okay, because it's going to be exactly like this again, I can do this and take advantage of it. It's like, that's not really how it works. Or even, saying like, oh, well, red black won the last,
It's
or like
not
mono green won the last 3.
It's not even like everybody's going to look at the data the same way that you are, right? Data evaluation is a part of the cohesive thing that you need to be doing.
Right. And just understanding what is actually going on as opposed to what the results are is a very key piece of that. I would just caution against looking at what the results are and saying that that's data.
No, totally fair.
Really,
I actually think Mason was really good at this with 5-color in Modern, Mason, where you ignored things that didn't matter, if that makes sense. Like, you were really good at that. How do you think that people can apply the lessons you learned in that to this?
There's a couple things. The first thing that kind of jumps out to me is one is to remember that like what Abe and you were just saying, just because last week, Greasefang and Red Black were, 5 of the 8 top 8 or whatever, doesn't mean it's going to be the same next week. It doesn't mean those players are going to play it. Doesn't mean they're going to end up in that same spot. And so overcorrecting is like a really big mistake that players have, and taking a really like granular, big picture approach, I think is typically the best way to do things. And so if you have a strategy you like that thing's strong, making sideboard changes is probably a better way to go about things than switching whole decks, right? So, for example, let's say, Rakdos and Greasefang have been two decks that are super popular in your area recently, right? You maybe want to have, another Braid in your sideboard so you can fight over Bankbusters and Greasefangs instead of doing something like, I'm going to play, Lotus Field or whatever you think is the best deck against those decks, right? That might not be the best decision because there are other people in the room and they might approach, like if everyone's doing what you're saying, then you're playing this constantly on musical chairs and you need to actually be at like some weird level where like you're responding to the metagame moving, but also not falling for the pit holes of this, and just having a good consistent deck is really good.
Yeah.
Really
Can I pause you?
Sure.
I like to believe that level 4 or even level 3 might not exist. Where like when you get that far deep, as what Mason just said, it's actually nonsensical. Like you're metagaming for a metagame that's metagaming. That's just inbreeding, right, Mason?
I mean, it depends, right? Like, what is metagaming if not inbreeding in some ways, just in general?
No,
right?
but that's what I'm saying, right? Like, you have a level 0, you have a level 1, you have a level 2. Are you not inbreeding by level 3?
I guess so. I don't know, I just would never participate that deep, I think, for the most part.
Mason would be like, "This is nonsense. I'm not doing." I think you're touching on my
I guess I am attesting to your point.
Yeah.
But back to the like making small adjustments thing.
Yeah.
I think that one thing to really do is to think about things that can matter in your decks in ways that you can cover multiple matchups with certain types of cards, and realize that that's going to be a lot easier in a format like Modern or Legacy than it's going to be in a format like Pioneer, where the answers are not scaled to the same level as the questions are. And we saw this in Modern back in the 2015 to 19 era before MH1, and especially MH2 in the 2020s. So it's going to be a little harder to find cards that can like actually cover all the matchups, but there are things that exist, and you can shift your strategy. And a lot of decks in the format, do fold to pressure plus disruption. So that's what Rakdos kind of does. It's bread and butter. Rakdos is an aggressive mid-range deck that turns into a bigger one post-board in a lot of matchups, and like that is why it succeeds. So if you just didn't like that, you could go a really far away. So I think looking for spots where you can double up on your answers and get a lot of 7 out of 10s is a good way to go the distance.
I love it. I want to talk about week-to-week adaptation before we jump off here. And the first thing that I want to talk about is, Abe, you and I talked about for this RC, and Mason, you mentioned it too, but like MTGO versus Arena and Paper, like how far ahead or behind, like what is the actual thing? Because like MTGO data, Arena, I mean, Explorer is a thing. People will use that to metagame in some variety. Like, I think a lot of the tech that was discovered in Pioneer over the last year actually happened on Arena first in a lot of cases, from what I've seen. I'm kind of curious how you guys think that this will shake out in the, I don't know, the seasonal MTG.
Well, luckily, I have the definitive answer. So we don't even have to have a conversation. I just can read the answer to you. So it's great. No, but jokes aside, I think one thing when you're preparing for week-to-week adaptation and you're seeing, like, let's say, we're going to this next week, everywhere there's runner combo, it's crushing challenges, it's doing great, blah, 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 and you have an RCQ, like the next day, right? Then you're going to be like, okay, like, how do I, sorry, I got distracted by you moving. Like if you're doing this, I'm sorry, I should pause so you can edit it out. Sorry. If you're seeing something happen like that, remember that in the real world, you have to get cards, acquiring them, getting everything. It's really hard. And so a common pitfall you will see happen at RCQs is players will see a deck do really well a couple days before an event on MTGO or something like that, where they'll see a bunch of content creators promote it, and then they're over-index to the deck. And I think typically a good rule of thumb is that the week prior to the week of your event is sort of the metagame to expect. So, for example, if you are going and to an event, and let's say it's this weekend's event, I might look at not last weekend's challenge, but the weekend before, because that gives people time to order the cards, get them in, have their stuff ready. And a lot of people want to have time to practice with the deck. So that lets people get time to get ready. So, and a lot of times when it comes to like week to week adaptation, I think you're actually going to be living a lot in the past. And while MTGO might be living in the current era, people have to get cards and acquiring them is a real thing. This happens for the RCs as well. So that's sort of my thoughts on this.
Because of the way the editing will work, I'm sorry for distracting you. I was agreeing with you excitedly, and I apologize for the video listeners. But yeah, I just agree. I think Mason hit the nail on the head. Abe, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, for the listeners, before recording, I said that I had the definitive correct answer in a few sentences, and I do. So, here's how this works: is that your paper metagame will go through phases that the Moto metagame has already gone through. What that looks like in terms of time frame, how far away it was from when it happened on Magic Online, that is very difficult to say. But your paper metagame will move in slow but consistent chunks as people are like, oh, this deck is winning a bunch of the events I'm going to. I guess I should be prepared for it. And then they will have that thing confirmed. They'll change and then continue to do that for a bit. That's really just how it will chunk out. And what you should do if you want to take advantage of this in terms of your week to week, much in line with what Mason was saying about not making big and drastic changes all the time, but rather making small, hedges and big, like allow that to cover the range of things you need to cover, and staying in the correct lanes, is just understand what happened. If you understand what happened week to week on Magic Online and why it happened that way, you can then respond to what you're seeing happen week to week in your paper metagame, and there is enough stability in how slow your paper metagame works for you to identify the correct place to be. And that's just how it works. You should not be like adapting to the noise of Magic Online when it happens.
I want to
wait
really
for it
clear.
to happen in paper and then counterpunch.
We had a player that I did coverage for, I don't know how many Utah RCQ or 1K events, and there was a person that was like, y'all need to stop just playing MTGO deck lists. Like, he was like adamant about it. I was like, so yeah, that's true, but like not looking at them is like wrong. Like, you need to know. Abe, you just hit the nail on the literal head. I said I had nothing to say after Mason said, because I agreed with Mason, but I agree with you too, where it's like knowing the why X happened because of Y gives you Z, and you want to be on Z, but you also can't make Z a forced thing. Like, you can't overcorrect for it. I think that's important. Let's talk about
it all.
Oh, go ahead.
It just all ultimately comes from understanding what your local RCQ metagame looks like in the aggregate, right? Like, what is the most represented thing? What is the way that, like, what are the things you actually need to be controlling for, right?
Yeah,
like,
I was playing creativity before I was jumping off on the last season, and all of ours are modern, and I was like, okay, well, I need to really focus on, I'm going to top 8 with creativity, but I need to be able to beat green black in the top 8s, because there's going to be a green black player. It's a bad matchup. That is metagaming. Like, 3 of our top 8 or top 15 players were green black, and then by the end of it, like, because the deck was not as good, like, they were left over. So I had to be able to beat this bad matchup. That's metagaming. Just saying I need to beat whatever won the last challenge for my local RCQ, that's not metagaming. That's you using a completely different result to dictate your current circumstances.
Right. And I guarantee you there's going to be a time period, if you look at Magic Online, where you're going to see that there was a deck that tried to beat like either red black tried to beat this deck in Pioneer, and then you can look at how all the red black decks built themselves to do that, or the deck that you're playing, other decks tried to respond to by beating it, in which case you need to see how your deck then adapted to beat those strategies, right? Like there's just a lot of information out there on Magic Online because they move so quick and they are so much more agile than paper that you can use to take advantage of what you're seeing in front of you in paper, which is going to be different. And that's just how it works.
That is going to do it for this week's Training Grounds. That is right. It is a Training Grounds episode. Mark it for those who really care about these style of episodes. It might be a goal on Patreon for me to do this for everybody. But with that being said, let's go to our Patreon question. If you're a patron of $5 or more, you get access to the Patreon question. It means every week we read one of the questions from the patrons. And then our bonus episode is just literally reading off all the questions, answering them, talking about them. It's really cool. Oniboss says, how do you go about learning a new deck in a format you're familiar with? This is the flip side of a question that we got just 2 weeks ago on learning a deck in a format you're not familiar with. And I'm kind of curious how you guys do this. I'd like to go to Mason first. Mason, how do you approach this?
Yeah, typically, if it's a format I really know, I actually don't need to play very much. I mean, I play less than the average person in my position anyways, but if I know the format really well, I'll sort of be able to identify and see sort of what's strong or what's weak about it, and then I can work through it from there. Typically, if I decide a deck is worth playing, it's simply because there's some factor or something to it that I can't quite seem to sort of think about how it would play out versus decks, or like why it wouldn't be a better or worse, or like it might not be exactly clear to me. And then I go about it with those sort of questions. And that's something that I think a lot of players do differently than I, is that when I'm going to play, unless I'm just playing for fun, which is something I do a good bit, but if I'm playing to learn, I'm sort of forming questions and having these questions, and then at the end of it, I'm trying to answer them. And, ideally I would do focus testing and not have to play, leagues against crazy stuff. But if you can't do that, which most people can't, just go in there and be like, okay, I feel like this deck would be, let's say, stronger than Rhinos because of this, right? Or maybe it's weaker than creativity because of this factor, right? Like a good example right now is the creativity deck in Modern. I picked it up and I didn't play it that much before. I'm going to play it for my RCQ this weekend. And I was just like, oh, this is 4-color, but with a combo finish, and it's able to end games quickly and doesn't lose the mirror, quote unquote, because you were really bad against creativity as 4-color. And so to solve that problem, I'm just becoming the creativity deck and moving away from 4-color deck right now. And I just sort of like looked at things, identify the problems, and when I do play, I'm trying to answer those sort of problems and move forward from there. Does that make sense?
It totally does. I actually want to jump on a bandwagon of like when I was the most successful in Magic, and it had to do with those like dedicated testing weekends or moments where I could really dive into like, I've already played this format a bunch, I know this format, and now I'm going to try to attack it, and I'm not the only person that's going to try to attack it in different ways, and then we're going to challenge each other. And that has been how I went about learning a new deck. Like, I think about learning... I mean, honestly, I think about learning Amulet Titan for the first time. That was like, hey, I'm going to learn this deck. I want you to play whatever you want. Actually, Smash comes to mind in a lot of ways for this. And I know that people either really love it or really hate it when I bring up Smash. But Smash is like a perfect analog for this. Like, I've played an inappropriate number of Smash Ultimate games for a person that has played like 10 Smash tournaments. But if you asked me what I thought of a matchup on paper, I could tell you what I think it looks like. And the reason that I can do that is because I've played a wide range of characters and tried them out to try and figure out what characters I like and that vibe with me. And Magic is a lot the same way. If I know the format, I probably know the sections of the format that I want to fit into and how I want to attack the format. Unless the format's broken, which I think this question goes out the window when it happens, right? Like, if the format's broken, this question doesn't even matter. You should just play the broken deck. But if it's not broken, I need to fit myself into where I believe the format can be attacked from and how I believe that I will best attack the format. And I would narrow my decks down to that, and then I would go through some kind of process to decide how I vibe with those decks, and then also how those decks vibe with the format. Because I think that will give you the best success.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys both touched on really, really great important things. I'll just say that something that I want to add to what you guys said, not only is it important to, right, if you've played the format and you understand what's going on in the format, you probably also, when you select the deck that you want to learn, know something about the deck, right? You have an understanding of why it is you're learning it. I would say that an important part of things is testing not only like what you like, not only trying to understand, okay, these are things I need to learn about how this deck works, but making sure that the things that you think are true about the deck coming into it are true, and spending a little bit of time just kind of playing the games with it to make sure that it's all intuitive and clicking, right? Like that's a really, really important piece of things that you don't want to overlook. Is as much as you might kind of know, like Mason's creativity example, you might know why it is this deck is strong and what it is about it that you want to be taking advantage of, but you need to make sure that that's still true when you're playing it in order for that to be the case that you want to keep learning it. And you'll also get a lot of good experience out of, right, like knowing how to play the good matchups in addition to then learning how to play the tougher matchups. So, because if you're playing a deck and you don't know how to win the good matchups, you're going to be like, why do people ever play this deck? I had that experience a lot playing like Dredge in Modern for a bit, where I was like, I was just not getting it in terms of like beating decks I was supposed to be beating all the time, and like I lost to all the time.
That was me this week with not this week, but last week with creativity, or maybe 2 weeks ago now. I was so lost. I was like, I don't even understand. Like Mason had to sit down and like he confirmed the things that I thought that like fixed a lot of my problems. It was rough. YouTube says it's random card. This is a repeat questionnaire. It means that like, come on guys, you want to hear your stuff heard? You can either become a patron, you can leave a YouTube comment. YouTube comments are one of the best ways to support the podcast, as they put us into the algorithm, the lords of the algorithm. And it says invasion of how do you say this word? Is it Segovia?
Segovia.
Potentially fit into creativity.
So Invasion of Segovia, if you don't know, because the set just came out, is two in a blue for a bet.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna. I had it pulled up. I was gonna read it. Go ahead though.
Oh, Invasion of Segovia is 2 in a blue for a battle. When Invasion of Segovia enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 blue Kraken creature tokens with trample at the defense of 4. And then on the backside, you get a legendary creature Serpent 3/3 that says non-creature spells you cast have convoke at the beginning of your end step. Untap up to 4 target creatures.
So this is a card that did not make our pick 2 set review, but would have been one of my hopefuls. I had lots of battles that I was looking at. This was one of 2 that I was the most excited for, and creativity was one of the reasons. I have a problem with this card. I don't think creativity flips this card, and I actually think that its flip side is really good in most creativity decks. And I don't think 3 mana make 2 things. Like, they're just better. Like, there are 2 mana make 2 things. My hope is that, you know, in the right decks, it seems better like in Modern than it does in Pioneer to me. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on this on creativity?
In Pioneer, which is, I believe, where the question was, they say, I guess they say
They don't say the format. I assumed they meant Pioneer.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, in Pioneer, there are like, if you wanted to do this sort of thing, you could for cheaper. Because like Spencer said, you're not going to really flip it outside of maybe the Atraxa build. But the Atraxa builds, they only want 1 target, right? Like you're not X's 2ing an Atraxa. So like,
Hold on. sorry, this is just a thought I had. I know I'm interrupting you, but I want to say this. I actually wonder if you played Goldspan Dragon with this card, if that would be worth it. Because it would just hit it. That was it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You would Goldspan Dragon does 4 damage to the battle. Yeah, but that's not like Pioneer power level.
Probably not.
I would assume Glorybringer probably does it better than that, because at least Glorybringer could but even then,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I don't really want a 3/3 that lets me convoke more, right? I like this card much more in the idea of an 8 Pyromancer deck, for example.
Sure.
The
Todd Anderson deck.
Yeah, one of those is pretty good. And then in Modern, I feel a similar way. But what I was saying before in Pioneer was that if you wanted something like this that made 2 bodies, you could do things like raise the alarm or whatever. And obviously that's not a color that the deck is in at the moment. But there are ways to generate 2 bodies that aren't on a creature. And so I'm just a little hesitant in this. And then Modern, I think it's a little lackluster. I much prefer the red-green invasion, I think, in those decks. But Abe has a different opinion.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Abe.
More cards don't make it than make it. That's always my thoughts.
Well, yeah, that's definitely true. I also think that, if you think about, creativity specifically, because I played it on this deck, I got to play the version of the deck that was, the Magnus Opus version this week, and this card definitely doesn't fit into that version. And I think that we're going to see creativity as a card that gets explored a lot in Pioneer as the format goes on, that it is not figured out yet. And I have a hard time believing that this is the way that gets figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I think inherently battles and playing a deck that does not want to have any creatures in it just doesn't mesh well.
I think that, oh my gosh, Mikey is literally in the live chat right now. I think the Dragons battle is actually crazy good.
Well, I'm just saying that, but that deck has creatures in it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
I think if you're not playing if you're playing a deck that actively wants no creatures it's putting into play, it is not going to be good to play that with battles.
The 2-mana Dragons battle would have been my literal slam dunk hit in this set. I didn't get to do it last week, but and then after playing with it, I'm convinced, I would be shocked if that card didn't see play in multiple formats. But I don't. This card isn't bad. I think that this card has already seen Pioneer play, so we're proving, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But I don't know if you want to.
I've seen it. Oh, they also talk about Thibblethip, by the way.
Oh yes. Finish the rest of the question, Mason.
They also asked us about the card Borborygmos and Thibblethip. It's an expensive body, but it draws a card every turn. What we think could happen with that. Borborygmos and Thibblethip, if you don't know, is 2 and then Teamer, so green, blue, red. Legendary creature Cyclops Monculus, 6/5, and it has whenever this creature enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card, then you may discard any number of land cards. When you discard 1 or more cards this way, Borborygmos deals twice that much damage to target creature and then has 1 to blue. Put Borborygmos and Thibblethip into the owner's library, 3rd from the top. I think it's just a little too expensive. And we talked about the other card in your thing in last week's set review, so I'm going to skip that one. But I don't know how y'all feel about it differently than Borborygmos.
No, I agree. I thought it was too expensive. I wanted to touch on Invasion of Segovia because, one, it sounds like Sokovia, which is, the Princess Diaries place, but also, I also think this card is already seeing Pioneer play. And so I wanted to discuss our thoughts on it. Join the conversation. You join the Patreon Discord with $5 or more on Patreon. Join the public Discord. We had to cancel our event this week. This is could be better on our part. I don't know. We talked about always improving a lot on the show, but we actually during our podcast meetings also have a segment called "Could Be Better," where we talk about things that we could have done better. It's not to hate on each other. It's not to down the podcast, but it's hey, this could have been better. And all of us missed the Mana Trader series. And I will say personally, I don't know how many you guys got, but I got 6+ messages from people that were I'm playing the Mana Trader series, I can't play your event. And that was a huge could be better because there were probably a lot of people that didn't message me or Mason or Abe. And so, one, I'm sorry to the people that were like, hey, I want to support CCMTG instead of this thing because you did that. And we could have done better. And that's our fault. So, that being said, you can leave a YouTube comment, get your comment right on the show. You can follow us on Twitter at CCMTG or Sam Black for the wonderful, already mentioned on this podcast, drafting archetypes. Michaela is going to take over for me full time on Mythicast, and I'm really excited for what she's going to do with an interview show. I think she's going to do an amazing job. She's already got guests lined up. We're going to figure that out. Really cool. You can like, sub, comment, or review. It's one of the best places to support us at the show. Mason, if people want to find you, where can they do it?
You can reach out to me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me each and every week over at Card Kingdom. This week I'm writing about Standard. Maybe a little goodbye until the next set comes out. Not much more Standard happening there. That's a joke, you see, because it's a new set in a month. Then we're going to have me over on twitch.tv/DMasonClark. You can find me over there. And then if you're interested in coaching, I do that full time. I have some openings / we get you out in advance 2-3 weeks from now. We can get you in. You can reach out to me for that via Twitter DMs or via my email, which is masoneclark@gmail.com. Feel free to send an email. If you have any questions, we can talk about it, have a little back and forth. Just put in your description something involving coaching. That way I know that, it's a message about coaching and not some phishing email because there are so many of those these days. But those are all the major places you can find me. What about you, Abe?
Find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. DMs are open for people who are looking for coaching. And you can also email me at morenothings@gmail.com for coaching. But yeah, that's where you can find me these days. How about you, Spencer?
You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find me on Smash Through. We're probably going to record a podcast in the next week. We have a lot of podcasts planned. We've really been focusing on the always improving moments of Smash as we get ready to kind of really launch the podcast. We were trying to do a monthly podcast, but I think that making that podcast as great as it's going to be in the late metagame that we're in has to kind of change. So it's a really interesting podcast to do. I do a weekly podcast with Patty B MTG, teammate of mine on the Conservatism Utah team, about nerd culture on Need to Nerd Pod. And then that's kind of it. I'm trying to kind of cut back on a lot of things, and Twitter is kind of one of them. So if you see me tweeting less, I think that I got a notification that I was on Twitter substantially less the last 2 weeks. That is on purpose, but hit me up. The best place to reach me is probably the CCMDG Discord or the He's a Game Media Discord, where I am constantly frequenting. Thank you everybody so much for listening. What did you learn this week, Abe Stein?
Swag store beanies.
Dude, I saw it and I was like, I'll send you a screenshot before we put it in the store, because I feel like they're not what you're wearing. They're the Colorado
cool,
style beanie. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I feel like I know already. I'll have to look at them.
Okay, the Colorado thick band.
Yeah, I
like a robbing one.
What?
No, just more of a toque.
No, it is Canadian. That's way closer, Abe. What does a robbing one look like?
Because they pull it over their face like a ski mask. There are some that go really
low.
That's
ski mask.
No, I said like a ski mask. They go lower. They go to your eyebrows.
There's no holes.
Apes. Yeah, apes is
You're
a
just
style.
blindly robbing a bank. You're give me the money.
You gotta cut little holes in the ski mask.
Mason.
I feel like you never robbed it. I learned that Spencer's never robbed a store today. He just sounds like an idiot. He's doesn't cut a hole in it at all.
I've never robbed a store.
Yeah, my always improving moment that really comes. Sorry.
What did you learn this week?
Yeah, that's what I was. My always improving moment comes from sort of there's a lot of different ways, I think, to approach this tweet that I had, and it's a lot more applicable than I think I thought it was. And it's been interesting to sort of how y'all parsed it and sort of your thoughts on it too. And it's just really interesting. And so,
yeah, for me, my learning moment this week was kind of, it was actually the moment where I agreed with everything Mason said, and then Abe gave me more that I agreed with. Was like this moment of like, no, yeah, also yeah, and I know that like sounds like, yeah, you're just agreeing with your ghost, but there's so much to seasonal MTG that I think that people don't realize, that people like Spencer Howland are going to get on the same level of you on a lot of formats. Like, and you have to understand that the players that I respect the most in MTG are the players that were able to do that. That were able to qualify and consistently win PTQs through seasonal MTG, despite playing way less Magic than their counterparts. Like, those are the people that I looked up to. And so to me, like, listening to Mason and Abe talk this week was like, oh my gosh, am I the boomer? Am I now the boomer? And I already knew I was the boomer, but I'm so excited for this. And I don't know, hopefully that I can make myself respect myself the way that I respected them back in my day. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you guys all next time with another episode of Constructed Criticism.